Since we are all stuck at home these days, I thought it would be best if I did a project that didn't involve going out to buy any extra supplies. So, purely stash busting. Earlier this year, I bought some fabric from Laura from Decor to Adore. I'm pretty sure it is vintage because it is only 39 inches wide. So to compare, most modern fabrics are either 45-ish inches or 60 inches wide. The fabric has been cut, but I have probably about 3 yards to work with. So maybe enough to make a dress, maybe. And the pattern I chose was this 1940s dewberry pattern from My Vintage Wish on Etsy. So it's a downloadable pattern that I printed at home. To start, I had to print out the pattern, but that had a couple issues. This pattern only comes in one size. It's a little bit too big for me, so I need to size it down in the bust and the waist, which would be fine if I had an accurate pattern to start with. My printer does not print all the way to the edge. So that means I don't know how big these little triangle matchup pieces are supposed to be to reference to know how wide apart my pages are supposed to be. And there's no like grid pattern for me to match or anything like that. So I have to basically guess as to how long this spacing is supposed to be. Yeah, that's pretty frustrating. Anyway, I went ahead and cut out all the pieces. Now this pattern is sized only about 1 inch bigger than my measurements, and while that might not seem like much, I still think it's worth making those adjustments. I'm doing the slash and spread method to make this smaller. I'll link to a tutorial in the description on how that works. On these pattern pieces, the orange line is my grain line, and the purple lines are where I'll split the pattern apart. It's important that these lines match up with one another on all the pieces. After altering those pieces, I made a muslin of the bodice. The fit overall is pretty good, except in a couple places. First, this pattern is designed to have shoulder pads. That's not surprising for a 40s pattern. But I don't have, nor want, shoulder pads, so I need to remove that extra ease. Conveniently, Tomcat Stitchery just posted a tutorial on this, which I will link below. I followed that tutorial and removed the 3/4 inch ease from the shoulder and the armhole. That is a big shoulder pad. Here I'm marking my seam allowances and my new stitching lines. I adjusted one side of the bodice and check out the difference. At this point I also added the gathering to the waist and decided to take out some length from the bodice. Next, I made the same shoulder pad adjustment on the sleeve piece and added one sleeve to my muslin. I can definitely tell that these sleeves are going to be too long, but I'll work with that later. The other problem I noticed was in the back. I have a really wide upper back, then a really narrow lower back. This often means that I get extra fabric bunching below my shoulder blades. So I took a slice out of the lower back on each side, still leaving enough space for gathering. Then I took the whole muslin apart to transfer my changes to my pattern pieces. And here are my new pieces compared to the originals. Everything's just slightly smaller all the way around. Now I can cut out my real fabric. However, I barely have enough to fit all of these pieces. I have to squeeze out every inch I can. And these skirt panels? Well, they were too long for my fabric. Luckily, they were also way too long on my body, so I took out about 2 inches from the middle and got them to fit on the fabric. Sadly, there was no way to cut around this flaw, but it's in the back panel of the skirt, so it won't be too noticeable. Before sewing, I added interfacing to the front button area and to the collar. I sewed the pleats and darts in the front bodice and sleeves. Next came shoulder and side seams. One nice thing about this pattern that you don't see in modern patterns, the side seams have 3/4 inch seam allowances. That's great for fitting in case you need to make adjustments. The rest of the seam allowances are only 1/2 inch. I serged the raw edge of the fabric because it was a quick and easy finish. Then I sewed the two collar pieces together. Clip the corners and trim the seam allowances. I used a chopstick to turn the collar right side out and oops, nothing to see here. Because I'm not top stitching anything on this dress, I understitched the seam allowances to the undercollar to keep the collar edge from rolling. Before attaching the collar, I stay stitched the neckline. This fabric has a pretty loose weave, so if I didn't do this, it would definitely stretch out too much. Pinning the collar in place. And this is where things got a little out of hand. I chose to do a neckline finish different than what the pattern called for. The pattern wants me to finish the raw edge of the back neckline with bias binding, but I wanted to avoid that look, mainly because I don't want to cut out any bias strips to do that. Instead, I had to attach the collar a little differently, except I did it wrong. Probably because I was paying more attention to the camera than to my sewing. Luckily for you, if you want to try this method, it is illustrated in the handy vintage sewing guide included for free with this pattern. And hopefully, unlike me, you'll do it right the first time. Anyway, pretend I did it correctly because this is what it looks like in the end. So when the collar is all attached and the facings are in place, this is what it looks like. So I know this fabric is hard to see, but here's the collar, here's one of the facings. This is the inside of the garment. What you do is after you stitch the facings, you clip in all of the seam allowances at the shoulder point and you tuck in all of those seam allowances into the collar along the back side. And then you flip the little facing seam allowances under, and then from here it's all hand stitching. So I'm going to hand stitch all along the shoulder seam, the back neckline to the other shoulder seam, and stitch that other facing down. And that way I don't have to use any kind of bias tape or anything else, and it's a purely clean finish, and hopefully it's going to look good. Next come sleeves, which get inserted into the armholes. Remember how long the sleeves were in my mock-up? I decided to sew a deeper hem than the pattern called for, and I blind hemmed the sleeves by hand, which, looking back, I probably didn't need to do, because if there was ever a fabric in the history of the world that could hide black thread, it would be this one, as I would later discover. Before adding buttons, I'm skipping over to the skirt, or the skirt lining, which I cut out of some leftover black cotton lawn I had in my stash. And remember how I changed the sizing of the bodice? Well, I need to do the same to the waist of the skirt. The hips should fit me fine, which is why I cut the skirt pieces out unaltered, because I can just pinch the excess fabric out at the seams at the waist. I'm doing that with the lining first, so I can then transfer my adjustments to my outer skirt and then sew that up as well. Because all my skirt seams are cut on the bias, I let my skirt hang for a while before hemming. And just so we're clear, yes, I realize that the pattern does not match up at the center front. That is for a number of reasons. One, the pattern on this fabric is technically a stripe, but it's on the diagonal, but not at a perfect 45-degree angle. The grain line is in the center of each panel, not on the sides. If it were on the side, I could get a kind of chevron pattern at that center front seam. And 3, I had to cut these pieces out all wonky because I didn't have enough fabric to begin with. So all those issues combined mean that there is no possible combination in which any of these 4 skirt panels would produce any coherent match at that seam line. Trust me, I've tried. So I'll just have to live with it. It'll be fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
I don't know what it is with me and skirts lately, but I'm gonna redo the skirt. I just could not take that weird center front seam. So I've taken the skirt apart, except for the lining. The lining stays the same. But I think what I'm gonna do is split each of the skirt panels in half so that I have 8 panels instead, and then rearrange them until I find a combination that I think looks good. And if you're wondering if that's going to change the fit, yes, I will have to refit the skirt pieces again, but that'll be okay. And if you remember, the side seams on this skirt have 3/4 inch seam allowances, which gives me a little bit extra wiggle room to play around with all of these extra seams. So it should work, I hope. And here is what the revised skirt looks like. I managed to mix and match my new panels into something that looks more intentional and less like I cut my pieces out sideways. At least I'm satisfied with it enough that I can now finish up the bodice. For buttons, I'm using these shiny black and silver ones from my stash. They wouldn't be my first choice, but again, I don't want to have to go out and buy anything for this project. Since I didn't have enough fabric for the matching belt that's included in the pattern, I'm adding a 4th buttonhole near the waistline. I would have sewn these buttonholes by hand. There's only 4, it wouldn't have taken too long. But I don't have any black buttonhole twist thread on hand either, so machine it is. Before attaching the skirt, I just need to gather the waist edges. And then I sewed the skirt to the bodice, making sure to leave the side seam allowances of the lining free for when I attach the zipper. My preferred method for a side closure like this would be a lapped zipper, but for that I need a regular zipper. Unfortunately, I don't have a regular zipper that is anywhere near the correct length or color for this dress, so I'm going to do an invisible zipper instead. To prep the zip, I have to press the zipper teeth away from the tape. When you zip it back up, the tape folds in on itself. This helps hide the zipper teeth when you install it. I'm not going to go into detail on how to install an invisible zipper because, again, I did this wrong. You're supposed to sew it into an open seam, not a closed seam like mine is, but I didn't want to seam rip anything I'd already sewn, so I took the risk and paid the price later. Okay, moment of truth. Will it zip? Looks pretty good. It matches up at the waist seam. Looks good up there, but down here it's getting a little funky. I fixed that little mistake and moved on to hand stitching the lining to the zipper. And now we're at the final step, hemming. Even after lopping off a few inches at the start of this project, my skirt is still a little long. I really wanted to hit at my knee. So after some more measuring and slicing, I hemmed the lining and the skirt. As you can see, I avoided hand sewing the hem because after ripping out all those original skirt seams, I knew how hard it was to see this stitching and how pointless hand sewing a blind hem would be. dress. It's totally wearable and it fits me well, and I'm proud of the quality of my sewing, but I guess I'm just not digging the 40s style. I really want to love the 40s, and I've even made a handful of 40s dresses. One thing I could change, I think the buttons need to be bigger. Once we can all go outside again, I'll go buy new ones. Also, I don't love the sleeve length. If the sleeves are too long, it looks like the bodice doesn't fit, but if they're too short, they don't look 40s enough. I've yet to find the sweet spot. I am glad that I fixed the skirt and that I lined it, because the loose weave of this fabric makes it a bit sheer. It's also more of a winter dress, and we're moving into summer now. Maybe in the fall I'll like it more. Anyway, thank you so much for following along with me, and thank you for subscribing. I'm working on a bigger project next, so I'm going to take a week off, but I will be back in 2 weeks with another stash busting project from a new era. In the meantime, I am on Instagram, so check me out there. I hope you're all healthy and staying safe. See you next time.